I would ask people to run themselves through a thought experiment. What do people imagine will happen when the fiduciary responsibility of a pharmaceutical corporation is in conflict with patient well-being or with public health or both? It's a simple question. Fiduciary responsibility is a legal fact. The people who run these corporations have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders. That is different than them having a moral responsibility to their patients. And that is different still from the moral obligation that they have to humanity, those who live and those who will ultimately live. And the point is, there is no magic formula by which these things all align. So you have to ask yourself the question, what do you expect somebody in a position of power or some group in a position of power, the board of directors inside one of these corporations, what do you expect it to do when its shareholders' interests are in conflict with the interests of its patients or of humanity? And humanity and its patients are not synonymous here, because realize there are many people on Earth who are not within reach of these vaccines. And so they may be infected with SARS-CoV-2 down the line because of some decision made inside of a corporation. So they are not patients if they are not touched by the product of the corporation, but they do suffer consequences of how we behave. If we, for example, fumble the ball and SARS-CoV-2 remains circulating around planet Earth, then all of the people who come down with it in the future are actually victims of our bad choosing. And so we have to work very hard not to do that. And I think the thought experiment, if you do it honestly, you will realize that there is a genuine problem. There is inherently no synonymy between patient well-being and shareholder well-being, because shareholder well-being is a financial matter. And we all understand, all adults know, that there are times when one makes money at the expense of other people. So we've seen that many times, and we've seen it pharmaceutically frequently.
And just to rephrase slightly, this requires neither evil nor conspiracy to be true. That's not precluding the possibility of evil or conspiracy, but it certainly doesn't require either thing. There is simply a conflict of fiduciary interest, potentially, which will potentially force corporations' hands, so to speak, metaphorical hands, into making decisions that are bad for all the rest of us.
Yeah, in fact, I think it was 2012, I gave a TEDx talk called The Personal Responsibility Vortex. And I would call people's attention. I did a little section in there. I worked with an artist, a former student of ours, Steve Bilsma. And basically the idea was if you do a thought experiment and you have three types of corporations at the beginning of the thought experiment, one type will do the right thing irrespective of its effect on profitability. One of them will do the profitable thing irrespective of the harm that flows from it. And then some third category is more realistic. It's some balance between focus on profit and limit on what the corporation is willing to do. And you start iterating the competition between these things. You find the do-gooder corporation goes extinct, and you find that the corporation that is balanced at the beginning of this experiment actually evolves towards ruthlessness in order to compete with the corporation that always does the most profitable thing.
Under the business model that does not restrict the behavior of said corporations.
Exactly.
Right? In a totally unregulated market, this is what will happen.
Right, a totally unregulated market. Now, astute observers will be thinking, but this isn't a totally unregulated market. And that's where we're going to end up talking about regulatory capture. But we will return to that. Let us just say, in this case, we can recognize that, at least in principle, somebody looking at, let's imagine you're not even in the pharmaceutical industry, you're just trying to imagine what these investments might be worth. The pharmaceutical industry might be worth a very different amount in light of a permanent crisis, one that was constantly producing opportunities to address the next version of COVID as the pandemic evolves, right? Then if the pandemic were to come to an end as a result of wise policy and high quality pharmaceuticals or whatever else, okay? That's just a simple fact. It might be true that the industry is worth a very different amount in those, down the two different branches of the decision tree. And so I would remind people that economically speaking, it is unfortunately viable for an entity, a corporation, or an industry to destroy trillions in the pursuit of billions. And that is something that we, those whose well-being will be destroyed in such a process, must counteract. We must recognize that that can happen, and we must not let it happen. So anyway, that's a hazard. Okay,